Ladies and gents, boys and girls, I want to talk to you about my top 5 ground baits that I use on commercials and natural venues throughout the winter. Before we dive into the ground baits, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell button, you'll get updates whenever a new video gets posted online. So let's start with commercial fisheries. At this time of year, the fish become less active, the colour drops out of the water, and a dark ground bait is my #1 go-to mix. You want something with a little bit of fish meal content, a little bit of pellet content, something that's really fine, and this Swimstin Black ticks all of the boxes. I like to mix it quite heavy, so add loads of water to it, probably in 2 stages, give it a really good mix up, and then importantly, push it through a really fine riddle. That creates a really nice, fine ground bait. Hopefully you can see there. It creates a really nice, fine ground bait that I can feed. And we're not talking about feeding loads of bait at this time of year. I might be feeding tiny little balls, you know, like your thumbnail, that size. So not ideal for bait companies this, because we're not going to be selling loads of bait off the back of this. But sometimes feeding less, especially in the winter, is the way to go. So kicking off the swim, on a standard commercial fishery, whether I'm fishing for skimmers, carp, F1s, 1 ball, probably the size of a tennis ball, dropped in on your chosen line is the way to go. But then, as I say, topping up with little thumbnail bits is quite often the kiddie. You know, so maybe after 2 or 3 fish, might top up with a little thumbnail bit. Now, on my side tray, when I'm using this ground bait, I'll have 2 bowls. One where I've got this ground bait in its quite heavy state, but it's still quite dry. But then at the side, I'll have another bowl with a bit of water in that I can add to the ground bait. And that way I can stodge it up a little bit, make it quite sloppy. It'll still hold together, but when I cup in those little balls, what it's going to do is it's going to sink to the bottom, a bit of cloud's going to come off, it's going to be really attractive to the fish, but it's going to stay in one little blob on the bottom, almost like a ball of paste. Fishing double maggot, single maggot, pellets over the top of that is definitely a winner on commercials at this time of year. Now, I love this ground bait because it's absolutely free of charge. Molehill. Now, when you're on the bank, when you're out walking the dog, whatever you're doing in the countryside, if you spot some molehills, some really fine, nice, dry molehills, you've got to collect some. It's a brilliant ground bait additive. So you can either use it on its own or mix it in with a ground bait. Quite often I'll be mixing it in with a ground bait just to add a little bit of weight. It also just holds a ball together a little bit longer, and it means that your ball takes a little bit longer to break up. It's a fantastic ground bait additive. So collecting the molehill, really simple. A bucket and a riddle is all you need. Make sure you riddle all of the stones, all of the big lumpy horrible bits off of your molehill, chuck it in a bucket, and then what I like to do is split it down, and I actually store the molehill in the garage in pint bags. So I've got probably 10 or 12 bags of molehill in the garage, in my bait drawers. And every time I feel that I need to add a little bit of molehill to a ground bait mix, like I say, for that weight or to just slow the break down a little bit of that ground bait. We're talking natural venues here, on rivers, canals, but every time I want to add a little bit of molehill, I'll just grab one of those bags, add it to the ground bait. Usually a 50-50 ratio is a brilliant starting point in the winter months. Ground bait number 3, and this is a ground bait I've caught loads of fish on over the years on natural venues again. Lakes, rivers, canals, where you're targeting roach, skimmers, perch, those natural species. Frenzied Hemp Black, absolutely fantastic. It's got some activity in there because there's all sorts of grilled hemp seed, coriander, there's some crumb in there. It's got everything you want because, once again, it's jet black. So in clear conditions, a jet black ground bait, absolutely ideal. Now what I like to do is mix it again to quite a damp consistency, but it will still break up. Now if I want that slower breakdown, what we'll do is we'll add the molehill soil that we talked about earlier, and that'll just slow everything down a little bit. So my general mix for winter river fishing or lake fishing or canal fishing is a bag of Frenzied Hemp Black with some brown crumb, and then I'd add some molehill to it just to give it some weight if I was balling in on a river. But as a base, that Frenzied Hemp Black is absolutely fantastic. So we just touched on it there, brown crumb. Is there a better ground bait than brown crumb for bream, skimmers and roach? Absolutely brilliant this stuff is. I've been using it for years. My first ever ground bait was brown crumb. I'm sure a lot of you guys use brown crumb before we even thought about using sort of bagged style, continental style ground baits, and it's caught loads of fish over the years. So for me, when I'm fishing on natural venues, brown crumb plays a massive part in my fishing, and I'll add quite a lot of it to a normal mix. Sometimes I want to just take the power away a little bit from a mix. You know when you open a bag and you think, that smells a little bit too strong today? Brown crumb's ideal for doing that. You're adding a little bit of food content as well to the mix, which is great for holding fish in the peg. So on really prolific venues, you know, when you're fishing venues that hold a lot of fish in the wintertime, brown crumb's a fantastic additive. Now, getting a good brown crumb is really important. I've opened some bags of brown crumb before. They don't smell of bread at all. They just smell of nothing really. You want to get yourself some brown crumb that smells of bread, really nice fresh bread. You know how beautiful that smell is. So what I tend to do is whenever I'm in a tackle shop and they've got those sacks of brown crumb just leaning up against the counter like a lot of shops do, just try and have a smell of the brown crumb, see what it's like, find yourself a really good batch of brown crumb. A sack of brown crumb doesn't cost the earth. For me, I've got a sack in the garage and all I'll do is scoop out couple of pints, put them in bags, again, store them in the garage, and I know that I've got a really good supply then. But brown crumb, absolutely superb additive to any ground bait mix. Now I've saved the best till last, liquidized bread. On any natural venue, whether it's coloured, clear, whatever the conditions, for some reason, liquidized bread is the go-to bait when you're catching a net full of roach. I don't know why, they must absolutely love bread, because we've talked about dark ground baits all the way through this, how you want to make the ground bait nice and dark so it matches the bottom and the fish feel comfortable feeding over the top of it. Bread, obviously, you can't get any whiter than that, you can't get any brighter than that, but they must just love bread that much that they can't get enough of it. So, preparing the bread. I've got a food processor at home. What I'll do is take a loaf of bread, I'll buy it 3 or 4 days before I want to chop it up, so it dries out slightly. If the bread's too tacky, it'll clog up in the food processor and it won't grind down fine enough. So what you've got to do, leave it to dry out for 3 or 4 days. Then cut the crusts off, blitz in the food processor, job done. All you've got to do then on the morning of your session, give it a good riddle for a fine riddle so you get a really nice, fine consistency. Maybe add a little bit of gravel if you're fishing on a river just to get the bait down quicker. But a bit of pond gravel is perfect for that. Really fine gravel, just add some weight. And Bob's your uncle, you've got the ultimate roach catching ground bait.